Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is the statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to Women in Preservation, the webinar series that features women who are working to save historic places. I want to thank our program sponsor, DMX Architecture of Fayetteville, for their generous support. Many of you are already members of Preserve Arkansas, and we thank you. If you're not already a member, I'd encourage you to join us for as little as $50 a year. Your memberships provide vital support to our organization and allow us to continue the important work of saving Arkansas's historic places. Please join us on Wednesday, May 17th, for the announcement of Arkansas's 2023 Most Endangered Places list. Weather permitting, we will make the announcement in front of the William Woodruff House at 1017 East 8th Street in Little Rock at 10 a.m. Preserve Arkansas is proud to sponsor the Quapaw Quarter Association's upcoming hands-on workshop at the Ernest Green House in Little Rock, June 12th through the 16th. Dubbed the Great Unveiling, the workshop will instruct participants how to remove non-original siding, make wood repairs, and repaint exterior siding and trim. The workshop will be led by nationally recognized restoration expert Bob Yap. Through our Becky and Charles Witzel Endowment for Preservation, Education, and Training, Preserve Arkansas is able to provide a number of scholarships that will cover the workshop registration fee. If you're interested, please contact me at rpatton@preservearkansas.org to learn more and apply. Join us on June 13th for a talk by Veronica Lilly, Vice President of Revival Architecture and President of Historic Works, LLC. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Natalie Henshaw. Natalie earned her Associate of Applied Science degree from Savannah Technical College in Historic Preservation and Restoration program in 2013. During and after this program, she's worked in hands-on preservation with a variety of nonprofits, construction companies, and federal agencies. From 2014 to 19, Natalie worked on seasonal cross-country projects with History Corps. In 2016, she founded a preservation company in Savannah, Georgia, that specialized in window restoration and historic masonry. Natalie has also worked extensively in educational fields. She taught after-school art classes, English in China, TEFL as an online tutor, United States and World History with Savannah Technical College, and Historic Preservation with Savannah Technical College and Lamar Community College. She managed Lamar Community College's Historic Building Trades program. Natalie enjoys traveling and hiking and typically follows lawful good alignment. Welcome, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you for having me and letting me speak to everybody and being part of the webinar series. It's great.
You're welcome.
Time to share my screen. All right, and thank you everybody for joining. See it okay?
Yes, looks good.
All right, thank you so much. Yes, thank you for the introduction, Rachel. I am the director of the Campaign for Historic Trades. It is a workforce development program of Preservation Maryland, but I am originally from Oklahoma, hop, skip, and a jump from Arkansas. I grew up in Tulsa, had nothing to do with trades or construction, and somehow managed to get to where I am very unintentionally, as I think a lot of us have a circuitous and winding path into the career field. I joked about and thought about naming this Lessons in Failure, but decided that was a little too bleak until you actually saw the whole thing. But I've had a lot of stops and starts in where I got to where I am now that provided lots of valuable insight in what I do currently. So I'm going to talk about where I started and where I got and what we're working on. So, like I said, the Campaign for Historic Trades, it is a workforce development program of Preservation Maryland. And our goal, our mission is to expand and strengthen careers in the historic trades. It is a programmatic partnership between Preservation Maryland and the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Training Center. Preservation Maryland is like Preserve Arkansas. It's a nonprofit statewide preservation group, almost 100 years old. We're getting there. We're dedicated to preserving Maryland's historic buildings, neighborhoods, landscapes, and archaeological sites through outreach funding, workforce development, and advocacy. Also in Maryland is the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Training Center. This was an organization founded in 1977, and it's unique among all the National Park Service sites and sections because they do not steward a specific historic site. It is a team of preservationists providing education, training, and self-performed services of preservation for different national parks, in addition to some state and other government agencies. So they work on, GSA sites as well. It is a team of just preservationists headquartered in Frederick, Maryland. It made a natural partnership with Preservation Maryland as a philanthropic partner. In the last few years, we actually came to an agreement about this workforce development. HPTC, the acronym, has a very strong internal need to train up tradespeople for their own staff. A few years ago, they were around 100. They have the capacity and the workload to hire 300 people, but it takes a lot of time and energy to train people up. So they created internal training programs, but also realized that just helping themselves would not solve the overall problems that our field encounters. So that's where we came in and we started partnering. I'm going to save that a little bit more towards the end, but some basis of where we're at. Our vision is to provide all tradespeople with clear career pathways, accessible education, and secure employment. And how we're getting there is registering apprenticeships with the Department of Labor, creating open education training resources. Oh yeah, pardon me, I forgot I have a laser. 1 second. Laser pointer, here we go. Create open education training resources that are available online in both English and Spanish. Work with stakeholders to support preservation trades programs, associations, and businesses. Develop statewide and national historic trades training opportunities that are accessible to all. Promote and recruit for the National Park Service's preservation trades programs. Advocate for historic trades training, and lead the national movement to strengthen and expand historic trades careers. This is a good time to define historic trades. There are a lot of different ways that you can talk about this. We've had people come to us about wheelwrights, basket weaving, decorative blacksmithing. There are some folk schools that teach all of these things, and places like Colonial Williamsburg that incorporate it as part of their interpretation. And so we had to hone in on what it meant to be construction historic trades. We went to the Secretary of Interior standards and their definitions for the treatments, the different ways you can treat historic properties. I won't get too far down into that rabbit hole, but we took those treatments and expanded them a little bit. So we say the skills needed to maintain, preserve, restore, rehabilitate, reconstruct, and deconstruct historic structures. Each of those has a different goal. Maintain is the first step in preservation, cleaning and upkeep of the historic fabric, making sure you're doing it in a way that respects the materials, preventing longer term consequences like roofs falling in. Preservation is the repair of existing historic materials that retain a property's form as it has evolved over time. If you compare that to something like restoring a building, you can have a building with different additions over time and you interpret it to restore back to a certain time. So if you have something that was added on the 1900s, but you want to restore it back to its 1850s, you would actually bring it back to what it looks like there, which might mean taking off newer additions or changing the layout back to what it used to be. Rehabilitate is changing the purpose and therefore some of the design to suit its new purpose. Pretty much any modern brewery and an old factory would fall under this. It's no longer a factory, now a brewery. We need to change what this space looks like to function in that way. Reconstruction is the skills to rebuild a structure that used to exist. So you need to have basic building skills, modern construction skills, but also sometimes historic, such as using an axe to timber frame. But knowing what those skills took to actually build it, not necessarily just repair. And then we've also added in deconstruction, because even if you think back to the restore, the addition you take off might also be historic. We want to retain as much of that fabric as we can. We want to record and document it before it comes down, rather than just taking a backhoe to it and tearing it all out. So we're incorporating deconstruction as a preservation mindset into these trades. So how'd I get into the historic trades? How'd I end up knowing all about this? So like I said, I'm from Oklahoma, and I went to the University of Tulsa and majored in history and majored in Asian history with a minor in Mandarin, and was planning to be in China for a couple of years teaching right after I graduated. So this is me in those first few months. I went with a very terrible program. This was my first big lesson in failure. I chose a very terrible company to work with, which I won't name, but there was a lot of back and forth about what the meaning of a contract was, what the payment actually was supposed to be. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And after a bit, I was like, I don't think I can keep doing this. I know this was my plan. I know I was going to be here for 2 years, but I think I have to call it and move back. And so I did. I had finished my degree. I'd been, sold all my stuff and had put other things in storage, said bye to all my friends and family. I was very fortunate. I worked at the Cherokee Casino in Tulsa in the buffet while I was in college, and I was part-time, so I was actually able to take a leave of absence. And so I came back after 2 months. They didn't expect me to see me for 2 years. And I asked if I could start working again. My parents lived in the city at the time, so I was able to move back in with them. And I was very fortunate to have that all as a backup and not be stuck in a bad situation. It was a great experience being there. Obviously, I loved all the historic buildings. This is at the Forbidden City, glorious. I was always inspired by it. Didn't necessarily know what I was looking at, but just thought it would be so amazing to work in these spaces. So ended up back in Oklahoma again, still working at the casino I worked at to pay for school and trying to apply for jobs. But this was in the 2008-2009 recession, and it was just not going well. And I started to look at different ways I could apply my history degree. I found an opportunity actually with the National Park Service, I think in Idaho, to help rebuild sod houses. And it was this really cool internship. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do. I want to go do that. And I applied and I didn't get it. And I was like, okay, well, how do I get qualified to go do that? What do I need? I didn't have any training in anything related to construction. Didn't know what a Phillips head screwdriver was level. I think I had hammered a nail before. And just from my upbringing, my immediate thought was, you go to school. So I looked up a whole different schools, and there are not a ton. If anybody has tried to look, there are not a ton in the entire country. There were a few more actually when I looked. This is back in 2011 when I started. And the one that struck me the best was in Savannah. It was Savannah Technical College. So I have my bachelor's and my master's in history and went back for an associate's degree. And it confused some people in my family who saw that as, well, we worked so hard to get you to a white collar job, and now you're going to a blue collar job and getting training for it. They didn't give me flack, but I think they were just always a little confused about why I decided to do that in particular. But I loved it. It was a really great time. I loved working with my hands, learning all these different things. And Savannah Tech has a toe dip program, as you can see from all these photos. So I got a class in a whole bunch of different things, and I became an expert in nothing, but I got exposure to all these different things. We did dry stone walling. I got to do blacksmithing, making 3-coat plaster walls, which I found out I really don't like. Stained glass, window work, not pictured. I also got to do bricklaying and masonry. We had carpentry classes, faux finishing classes. So I got a very broad spectrum of experience. I was not necessarily prepared to go into the field. Like I said, I did not have any practical experience before this. My first job was just glazing windows, and that was something. Just glazing window after window width or window for this big job, and starting to understand some of the business side of it. Pretty much throughout school, I did a few different pickup jobs, but I worked in food service still to pay for it. I didn't qualify for any student loans because I already had a degree, and I didn't qualify for any other financial aid. So I had to pay out of pocket or just take out a couple private loans to make it happen. And it was a lot to juggle. It was a lot to juggle. But after I graduated, I started working at Fort Pulaski National Monument. So this is a second system fort in Savannah. It's on an island. It was built after the War of 1812 to protect against British invasions, which never happened again, unless you count the Beatles. And it was only used in one Confederate battle for a couple of days. So it's actually a very well-preserved fort. It has a moat, it has mounds. It's right on the shipping channel, so you can see the shipping containers as it goes by. It was a beautiful space, and I got a lot of practical experience with masonry and repointing in particular. As you can kind of see in this, there's lots of mortar missing between a lot of bricks. In the 1930s, when they restored it with Portland based mortar. And so a lot of it had to come back out and be replaced with appropriate lime mortars. So we were on a preservation crew that just did that. One of my bigger projects was helping relay some of these loose bricks from where they actually mounted the cannons. You can see where that mount is. There's no cannon on this one anymore. But a lot of these were loose and needed to be repointed and reset. So tons of masonry experience with that. And from there, I went into the private sector and worked with a company that did a lot more commercial contracting, which was also a very big learning experience. Hadn't been on really any commercial sites before, and I learned a lot about the dynamics of having the superintendent and the GC and subs and scheduling things like concrete coming up and through the top of a roof, and how do you work around that with your crew and your scheduling? How do you talk to the architects on these sites? These were a lot of things that just you cannot address in school. You don't get it until you're actually on the job site. And I was pretty unprepared for that as well. So this was a good learning experience, even though I was really thrown into the fire and didn't do as well as I'd hoped, because there was just so much I didn't know that I didn't know. And I think that particularly as a woman, not having that background, it was really difficult to find a footing. Luckily, I had a lot of supportive coworkers that helped me through and helped me learn and taught me a lot of things. From there, I went to HistoriCorps and I worked with them seasonally for several years. So this is Picture City. I'm going to show lots of pictures. This is our first project in West Virginia. We got to do windows, we got to do shake roofing. And the model of HistoriCorps is having a project supervisor who is a subject matter expert. And I was the crew leader. So we were the only 2 paid staff, and we lead crews of volunteers on restoration projects on public lands. And the experiences I got with them were really fantastic because I got a wide breadth of experience. It was also very focused and dedicated because it was smaller crews. and I could work one-on-one with the project supervisor and learn a lot from them. So this was our first project, and I had a fun revisit of it just last year. They were fixing up this old fireman's lookout cabin. There used to be a tower in the forest to be a rental, and people could stay in there overnight. And so last year I actually got to go back and stay in there overnight. It was really fantastic. My next project was log cabins. We got to replace some sill logs. So this is the one that we took out. You can see the rot. We did some dry stone restacking in the foundation, and we did some window work. As you can see, it's pretty broken. My next one too was just some siding repair on an old mill, actually in the Mark Twain National Forest, so not far from you all. Beautiful site. We also did some repointing on the stonework and fixed some structural timbers inside. It was also a wonderful learning experience. This one was in Colorado, another fire lookout tower. It is right up there. You can see that little tiny dot. It's about 12,000 feet above sea level, and you can really only take cars to here, but we were able to take a car here, and then you had to hike another 30 minutes up with the materials to get to it. We did concrete repair. That one was pretty interesting because the concrete came afterwards on top of some stone foundation. And as you can see, it's literally on a pile of rocks. But for some reason, they brought up river rocks to mix with their concrete, which is a really bad thing to mix with concrete as your aggregate because it's smooth. And so all the concrete was just popping away from these smooth rocks. I don't know why they did it, but it was an interesting, interesting project to figure out how you restored it. Did we want to restore it back to the bad aggregate, or did we want to restore it to where it would last with a sharper aggregate that would not just pop away again after a few years? We also changed out some of the structural timbers up here that had some really crazy cuts on them and crazy angles. I think that's when we got snowed on. There's some snow up there. That was a very intense project and also tons of fun. During this time, I also transitioned and actually worked with HistoriCorps admin on our partnership with Lamar Community College. This was also a 2 years associates program to use HistoriCorps projects essentially as learning labs. And students could attend online classes and then go to these projects and get their degree in that fashion. And I think theoretically it worked really well. When it came to rubber meeting the road, the administrative side of that was very difficult. For example, we had a carpentry class. For each class that you have at a community college level or just an accredited college level, pardon me, you have to have learning objectives that are approved by boards of education. And for carpentry, one of those, or some of the learning objectives were building a stair stringer, framing out a stud wall 16 on center, things like that. We couldn't guarantee that. As you saw, a lot of our projects were things like log cabins or timber framing. So you're not going to do a 16 on center stud frame wall. And when we started discussing that, and I said, I cannot guarantee that the students going through this will learn how to build a stair stringer because it just might never come up. We didn't have a lab space to teach that. We came to that decision of this can't exist in the way we built it then. There was also issues with students doing projects out of the state and students registering from out of state. So if somebody lived in California, it was actually very difficult to get them registered to attend this college program, even with all these like Western Association of College agreements in place to make it easier. There was just a lot of functionality that made it very difficult, and it was very disappointing because I think there is something to that model. Like I said, when I was in school, I got very good experience, but they're just things that you learn on the job you cannot teach in a school-based setting or a lab-based setting. One of our big partners at the time, though, was Bent's Old Fort. This is one of it. It is actually a historic reconstruction. So in the 1970s, they reconstructed this, I think, late 1800s trading post.
that was adobe that didn't get maintained and essentially melted. And they reconstructed it. And now the reconstruction is historic. And this is a lovely peacock that just was hanging out at the fort. After that program folded, another lesson in failure that I took with me. I guess another lesson from that too was I had tried to work with the Department of Labor on apprenticeships at that, because I saw that on the job training that we could provide in tandem with the related instruction. Apprenticeships have both the on-the-job training and related instruction, so college and job-based training. And I thought it would fit very well. And the way that they were structured at that time with Department of Labor and apprenticeship regulations, it did not work very well. And I got shut down very quickly. So that was another lesson of failure. So I went back to field work. This one was in Virginia. We were working on a college campus with this one, doing some of the repointing of the brick, a little bit of the stair work. We ended up doing some siding replacement as well. And then I got to do a very fun one in Alaska. This is near Ketchikan, Alaska, along the peninsula that goes down the Canadian border. It is in a temperate rainforest. So we were rained on pretty constantly. And it is also in a national wilderness area, which means we cannot use power tools. So everything we had to do was by hand tools, because you're not allowed to have modern sounds in a national wilderness area. They want to also preserve the soundscape, which I thought was, I'm going to say like gimmicky at first, but I was like, yeah, okay, I guess it doesn't matter too much. But after being out there we would do 8-day stints, I heard a motor from a boat on this inlet, and it woke me up in the middle of the night. And I realized how much just ambient sound really impacts you when you don't even realize until it's gone. So this is the Adirondack shelter built in the 1930s. And this is a tree root here. You can see in a future photo. But that tree had actually uplifted and fell down and took the structure with it. And so it was a giant game of log pickup sticks. The added difficulty is that this area has 15-foot tides, pardon me. So this was on the bank at high tide, and this is the low tide. So this picture is like the one down here. I'm standing almost at the edge with the water filled up. So we had to be very strategic about where we were set up in our camp and where we were building and when we could take the boat in and drop off supplies. And like I said, we'd be out in this location for 8 days at a time with our small crew. So this was the shelter that we were building in progress. Pretty basic log structure, but we also had to cut down these at an angle, and we had to fell some of our own trees for rafters and purlins. So we'd go out and hunt for trees and saw them by hand down and bring them over and notch them out for these different purlins and rafters. And we would take turns doing these angle cuts with the saw. About each one would take an hour worth of time. That alone was about a week's worth of work, just sawing logs. And we were all by ourselves and got pretty goofy because we couldn't have our cell phones, couldn't talk to anybody, and we're out in the middle of nowhere with each other. So this is our photo shoot. And here is our final one. So this, after the shelter was completed, it was a 3-sided, and here's that root ball in terms of the size. It was a very majestic location, like I said, because it's a national wilderness area, and it has some of the, original forest, virgin forest, I think. So some of the trees were spectacularly huge, and you would actually have to climb over them to get the new trees that were growing out of it. And that's where we got some of these smaller rafters and purlins. So that was a very amazing project. Very unique learning experiences, but also really showed the value of power tools. This was another one in Virginia where we did rebuilding a foundation and also fixing some of the framing that had rotted away. You can tell with the new wood where that was, but this had all been rotten out and some of the bricks had fallen apart. So this is afterwards. We had to work pretty hard to get this mortar to match the original. It was a very brown, sandy color, and pretty difficult to match even with like using local sand, using some natural cements as well. And here's me under working on the back wive of building up some of the brickwork. I had a lot of trust in those jacks. This was another project in California. Oh, will it let me? Let's see. Maybe not. This is a small lesson in failure. Let's see if it'll do it. We were working on this one schoolhouse to put these window sashes back into place and make them operable. These are 2 sashes, and the one I'm pulling on is supposed to go down, but not the one I'm not pulling on. And so we were trying to make a video of how window sashes and weighted window sashes work, and it did not work for us. I'm still not exactly sure what was happening there, but the weights were off. From all these experience with HistoriCorps, I actually got a lot of experience with windows, which led into my business. So this is another one in Arizona, again, working on windows. I'm very excited to show off the weights and the pulleys. It's great to actually unearth it and see how it all functions. So I was demonstrating to everybody about how those weights work and counterbalance each other, so your sashes go up and down. But it was a lot of paint scraping, a lot of repainting, lots of window work, lots of wood repair. And another random one, and it's my final HistoriCorps one, but this is actually a ruin that we're helping preserve. It's a fire lookout tower that burnt down, ironically enough, from a lightning strike. They didn't have a lightning rod put in place in time, and so it burnt down. But they wanted to keep people from getting up there because it was very steep and easy to injure or kill yourself. I actually lost my phone off the mountain while doing this, and it died. It died pretty epically. But we were just contracted to bring up the gate and get something that was nice and preventative to keep people from getting over there. And it was another situation where we had to hike up for 2 miles. And it's not something I ever thought I would be involved in. We had to work on the design of the gate, work with a contractor to get it made very quickly, and then figure out how to get it installed. I was by no means a metal expert, but we figured it out. So in between these seasonal stints, I would come back to Savannah and I started my business, Henshaw Preservation. And at first I tried to do masonry and window work. I actually really love masonry, but the business of running it was very difficult for me. I didn't have a crew that was working with me, and trying to find smaller jobs that was suitable for a single person and having the space for the tools necessary didn't make a viable business model. I had to do a lot of other things like plaster work, which I said I didn't like and it didn't want to do. And I remember going to a window workshop and the person telling me, once you get one window job, they just won't stop. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. I got a single window job and it just kept coming. And trying to do all of that meant every single new job, I had to get a new set of tools. And I just decided I can't keep doing that. I need to just specialize. And so we reduced down to just windows and doors, fenestrations, and booked out for about 2 years worth of work now. It's a lot. I finally had that flip experience of having to run projects, having to hire people, realizing how much I actually need to train them on, and some of that site-based understanding, working around their schedules, scheduling with homeowners, estimating and contracts. I took a free small business class here in Savannah, which was very helpful, but there were definitely some lessons in failure, both in monetary, contracting, communications. It's just a constant learning experience. I will say it's very fortunate to have groups like the Window Preservation Alliance and some social media groups all around windows. The industry is very supportive. It's about half and half with women as well. There are a lot of female business owners. And so it was an area of construction that I felt very welcome in, felt like I could ask questions and didn't see the same levels of some of the toxicity or misogyny that was in some other areas of construction. So on top of that, I like the window work. It's fun. It's interesting to understand them and see how they work, and also turn people into window snobs. So in case anybody does not know about historic windows, this is just the anatomy of a double hung window. The pictures we showed, they just work on a counterbalance. And so you have your sashes that are tied into weights around a pulley, and you push it up, the weight should just keep it where you push it up or when you push it down. So if it's not doing that, it's because it's not weighted or attached correctly, or there's something in your way. And once you start puzzling it backwards, it actually makes a ton of sense, but you have to know how it's supposed to function to be able to work backwards. And I think it's a big misnomer that that's unattainable for people, but there are also a lot of potential hazards, lots of lead paint, sometimes some asbestos in our glazing, things like that, that are worth being aware of. But windows are very repairable, and there's a lot of windows to repair. So in addition to running the business, I also interspersed with teaching back at Savannah Tech. So I went back and taught some classes, and I didn't have as many pictures as I thought of that, but I taught in masonry and bricklaying and a carpentry class. So this was us working on pouring a concrete form to build out essentially a brick oven and practice our bricklaying skills, and adding in different aggregates to make it lighter. So we added some perlite to actually make it a lighter concrete, but these are the students getting to play around with mud. And I got to flip that position of where I used to be the student, now the teacher. And I was told by both staff and some of the students that it was very meaningful to have a female teacher for the female students, and seeing that it was possible and having that person to talk to with it. I think the other great thing about Savannah is that there is a strong network of women in preservation, and we have different get-togethers. We have a happy hour. We talk to each other about the issues that we're facing. So I think that we can have it as an FAQ section or a discussion point, but if we're talking about having more diversity in the trades for different things, I think these type of affinity groups can be very powerful, and having somebody to talk to and a mentor to talk through and help find and navigate some of these things. I really wish I had it 10 years ago to help me get through some of those very difficult moments. And when I did have that, I was very glad. So that is my experience that leads into Preservation Maryland. So I was working on a job site and got a call out of the blue from Preservation Maryland to talk to me about this campaign for historic trades. And I was like, I don't know, people have said this before. Let's see what's behind it. And when we started talking about registering apprenticeships, partnerships with the National Park Service, already having a network in place to help support, I was sold. Like I said, a few years ago, I had already tried to do this Department of Labor thing. I knew it made a ton of sense. I knew it was possible, and they just didn't hear me. And so hearing that a lot of these pieces were set up and in place to go forth, I was like, oh my gosh, yes, let's do this. This is my white whale. And I'm bringing all of those experiences as a student and as an intern, as an NPS intern, as a private construction apprentice-like person, somebody running a business, somebody teaching. I'm trying to bring that all into what we're doing because it's all a cohesive problem. It all started with the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. They issued a policy statement in 2020 about what was needed for trades training. And they recommended, we won't go into all the tiny words. You can read it on their website if you look up the policy statement, and we were part of it, creating training programs for people to get into it and at different levels, creating a unified open education resource curriculum so people can access the same things and have the same learning objectives and outcomes, creating a credentialing system so when a professional says they know what they're doing, you have a way to check that. For example, with the window work, I don't have to prove to anybody that I know about windows. It helps to get the jobs that we do, But I could just say I know how to work on Windows and hop in and work on Windows. There's no qualification standard. And then registering apprenticeships. These are some of the few construction trades that don't have apprenticeships with it. And it's always tried to operate outside that model, but it works for most other construction industries and for a reason. And so we're getting those registered up and building that out, that employer base. So that's essentially what this says, what we're doing. We're building out pre-apprenticeship training programs, which are ways to qualify a training program towards an apprenticeship. If you have a 4-year apprenticeship and you do a 6-month training program that is a pre-apprenticeship, you only have to do your apprenticeship for 3.5 years rather than 4. We have a curriculum developer making open education resources for people to access. We're hoping to get those piloted over the summer, up and online, that people can come to and get that information. The apprenticeships, we have a few drafted with employers, and they're going through the Department of Labor now on a review process. And from there, we want to make the professional qualification standards that you also see in, I don't have my laser pointer. The professional qualification standards you see for other industries related to preservation. The National Park Service has those published, and we want similar things for historic tradespeople. The pre-apprenticeships we're working on, we have partners that we're working with in terms of what are the learning objectives for your programs, how many weeks does it take, what are they getting out of it, and then where do they go? We're also trying to develop our own. There's models with Youth Corps, and we are working with the state of Maryland to create a Maryland-based Corps where people can come and train and work on Maryland Park Service sites. We're developing that to work within our state, but also as a template that other states can follow. So how do you advocate for that? How do you get the legislation authorizing? How do you get the funding for it? And then how do you operate it? It takes a lot. I'll say that. Our open education resources, we have our curriculum developer working on it. Like I said, we have an online learning management software. We are working with a partner in Puerto Rico to get those resources translated into Spanish. We just actually did some 508 training with National Park Service to make sure they're all ADA compliant. And we're licensing it under Creative Commons. So that's the other issue. If a school wants to use resources, actually anybody, there's a lot of resources that are copyrighted, and so you cannot use it for your training programs. By licensing it under Creative Commons, anybody can use it for their training programs, including photo libraries. Like I said, apprenticeships, we are working on these with our employer partners. Right now, we're revising the idea of the preservation technician into a certificate program for related industries. And we want to take that to things like the Electrical Workers Union and have a preservation technician certificate so they understand how to work on historic buildings. Same with things like the plumbers. Preservation carpenter, a deconstruction technician, historic roofer, and historic window technician. And lastly, our professional qualification standards. The way an apprenticeship is set up, let's go back. So say we have a historic window technician. After working with the WPA, we have it sketched out for 3 years. We say you're competent to do these things, and you should have this many hours of related instruction. So therefore, you can say a journey person, a journey worker of a historic window technician has 3 years of experience minimum. They have, how many hours would that be? Around 450 hours of related instruction. And that can be things like lead safe RRP, OSHA 10, historic preservation fundamentals, carpentry class. So we have those laid out. And therefore, you have your professional qualification standard. A historic window technician should have at least 3 years and 450 hours in related instruction hours. It doesn't have to be degree oriented, but we're lining it up to where it does match up with like the Savannah Tech program. So you can go to school, get a degree if you would like, and also work towards your apprenticeship. With our professional qualification standards, that's also our employer partnerships. It's integral. all these training programs, you want the training program to lead to a job. And so when you're developing a training program, you have to have the jobs in mind that the people can go into. I will say personally, I floundered a bit after I completed Savannah Tech, trying to find where to go, how I fit in, what I was qualified to do, and also the employers understanding what I could do. The private sector job I went into thought I had skills to lead crews, but that I didn't have masonry skills. And they were surprised to learn that I could repoint. And I was like, I have been repointing for 2 years. Why did you think I didn't know about masonry for this masonry job? So there is a lot of dissonance between the two that did a disservice to both the students, but then also the employers. So we really want to start strengthening those partnerships between industry and the training programs. And I will stop there. We have different ways to get involved. If you're interested in these things, we have a monthly newsletter. We have a monthly call for training programs. So you can just drop in. It's called Talking Trades. We feature a different program each time to kind of talk about how their model works. And then you can talk with other program administrators. We're culminating that next month in our American Historic Trade Summit that's going to be in Providence, Rhode Island, and it's sessions designed for program admins on how to develop, expand, strengthen their programs. We have social media platforms that announce all of that. And then if you're just looking to support the work, we love getting in touch with employers and subject matter experts. Like I said, we need to strengthen those bonds. Same with training programs. We have a map that we keep. So when people come to us wondering where to get training, we can take them there. We are working on toolkits for people to use in the curriculum. So we'll have toolkits based on where you're coming from and what you need and help guide you through those. If you know of any sponsoring networks or organizations, things like the Stone Foundation. I got a call from SPOOM, the Society for the Preservation of Old Mills. We want to get in touch with those groups that are interested in historic trades. And also for different initiatives, sometimes we need letters of support. So if you're interested in providing those, we'd love it. One thing I actually forgot to add in too, I'm a board member of the Preservation Trades Network. That is the network of preservation tradespeople. It is an international organization. We have an annual conference and we'll be demonstrating different trades at that. So also if you know tradespeople, send them that way. We love to build out the network and expand and get to more areas of the country as well. And I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for your excellent presentation. I would invite anyone who has questions or comments for Natalie to please put those in the Q&A or in the chat, and she will get to those. In the meantime, I've got a couple questions that you didn't already answer. Can you talk about the results of the labor study that the campaign commissioned? I'm interested in that.
Yes, I did forget to bring that up. So that came about actually, we're working right now on a landscape survey of preservation education training programs. There's a lot of different models. There's been a lot of programs that existed and closed. And we are trying to study what makes a successful program. What can we make as repeatable models? And so we had that as our charge when I first started. But then when I tried to support things like grants or talk to people about or talk to the Department of Labor about this need, they would say, okay, well, what's the need? And I would say, well, anecdotally, a lot. And I realized that we didn't have numbers because all of these are embedded in occupational codes for modern construction. And so as we kept going down this in a few months, I was like, we need these numbers. We need to understand what is the labor force working on historic structures? Because then if we can compare that to the training and say, okay, all these training programs combined only train 200 people a year, but you have 10,000 people working on these historic structures every year, and you need 1,000 new ones each year, you have insufficient training programs. So we embarked on that. It was a very difficult navigation to try and get to numbers that we could use and that were justifiable. So it is an underestimation for sure. one of our only data points that we could use was historic tax credit projects. And we tried different ways that we could say any historic building, because like me and my business with windows, we very rarely work on anything that has historic tax credits, if almost never. But we're busy working on historic buildings. But we couldn't find a way without those occupational codes to do that. So severe underestimations on what the need actually is, and it's a better framework to say it's just for historic tax credit projects. But the highest needs were in preservation carpenter and also preservation electrician. So the number of electricians was second highest in terms of a job category. So that's where some of our reframing really came about too, was what is the biggest need? How do we drive towards that? How do we get those needs met? Because that's going to have the biggest impact. And so that's where we came up with the idea of having a certificate program and working with the electrical union. And we've had a couple talks with the union representatives, the National Association of Building Trades Unions, about this concept, and they're receptive. So we think we have a model worked out, but I think that was one of the more surprising takeaways to me, but it does make sense because there's tons of buildings that need retrofitting. That's online. If you all want to look at it, it's great for grant writing.
We know how important a study is. You gotta have the numbers to back up, the reason for your ask. Okay, let me see. You've got some comments here. Very interesting. So helpful, especially enjoyed hearing your background and where you got your training. It seems like you've been very successful in spite, or maybe because of your failures. Thank you for an interesting narration. Oh, and asking if you can share a link to the labor study in the chat, please.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then you've got something in the Q&A. Here we go. Thank you. Very impressive progression of your career. I admire your self-determination and desire to learn as you go. Very nice.
Thank you. You guys are very complimentary. Thank you.
So far, that's the only comments and questions. So if you put the link in there, and I've got one other question, and people can you still have time to type one, but what do you enjoy most, or what are some things that you enjoy most about your work?
Ooh. I guess I'll separate that with trades work. I think they're kind of the two. Trades work, like I said, I love masonry. It's like Legos and playing with mud at the same time. It's just really fun. And it's also just really fun to figure out the geometry of it. I really liked geometry in high school. And it's just a very practical application that is wonderful. And then, yeah, you get to play with mud. So it's just fun. And then I also very much enjoy painting. Again, maybe because the little kid part of me, I just love painting. This is my house with the crazy colors. There's lots of crazy colors everywhere. I think while I was working on this job, I try and get outlets elsewhere. With Preservation Maryland, I think that I really enjoy being able to work meaningfully on something that'll make it better for the next people. And I think there is an unhealthy attitude in the construction world that is like, well, it's been done this way and this is how I had it. So here's you too. It's a very much trial by fire. And that's just not a method of inclusivity that will get more people into the field. And it doesn't have to be that way. And so I really want to set up some systems that will make more people want to come into the field. And I hope that even if it makes it better for one person, like it's worth it. But I think working towards that goal is really what keeps me doing what I'm doing. And, a lot of it's just typing out emails. So like emails aren't fun, but the work itself is very meaningful to me.
Go ahead.
I sent you directly the link.
Oh, yes. I was like, oh, I see the link. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dropped in.
Thank you. There's the link for everyone. Thank you. And we applaud your efforts. Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions or comments. And so I'll just thank you again for your time and for your talk and for what you're doing. We appreciate it. Thanks, Natalie. Bye, everybody.